Kira Chun sat in the back row of the Advanced Tactical Theory classroom and stared at her datapad with practiced disinterest. The lecture hall stretched before her in curved tiers and filled with students from across the known galaxy. To her left sat a Krod named Vexar, and his massive frame took up 2 standard seats, and his gray, armored skin caught the overhead lights. 3 rows down, and a Mindery student named Seleth listened to Professor Voldrin with her telepathic tendrils quivering slightly as she absorbed information. The Vex students clustered near the front, and their metallic augmentations hummed softly as they recorded every word through neural interfaces. Kira appeared unremarkable among them. She was human, and that alone made her less impressive by galactic standards. Humans had no natural armor like the Krod. They possessed no telepathic abilities like the Mindari. Their technology lagged behind species like the Vex, who were born with computational enhancement. The Galactic Defense Academy accepted humans as a courtesy more than anything else. Professor Voldrin paced at the front of the room, and his Mindari form moved with fluid grace. The Zarthian swarm employed overwhelming numbers, he said, and gestured to a holographic display showing insectoid warriors. What counter-strategy would prove most effective against such tactics? Vexar raised one massive hand. Concentrated firepower at choke points, he rumbled, and his voice carried the confidence of a warrior culture. Establish kill zones and force them into disadvantageous terrain. Professor Voldrin nodded, and his tendrils swayed in approval. A solid approach, he said, and turned to scan the room. His eyes fell on Kira. Miss Chun, he called, and your thoughts on combined arms coordination against swarm tactics? Kira looked up slowly and blinked as if she had been daydreaming. She started and paused to gather her thoughts. I suppose you would want to maintain defensive positions and use long-range weapons, she offered, and her voice carried just enough uncertainty to sound average. Maybe set up overlapping fields of fire? Vexar snorted quietly. Several Vex students exchanged glances, and their optical sensors flickering with what might have been amusement. Adequate, Professor Voldrin said, and already moving on to call on a Vex student, who would undoubtedly provide a more sophisticated analysis. Kira returned her attention to her datapad. This was her routine, and had been for the past 8 months. Give answers that were correct enough to avoid failure, but unremarkable enough to avoid attention. Sit in the back, blend in, be forgettable. During the break between lectures and Vexar approached her station. Chun, he said, and loomed over her desk. You are aware this is the Advanced Tactical Theory course, and yes? Kira looked up at him with carefully neutral eyes. I'm aware, she said. Then perhaps you should contribute more than basic textbook responses. He continued and crossed his massive arms. Some of us take our studies seriously, and we expect our classmates to do the same. I'll try harder, Kira said, and kept her voice mild. Vexar grunted and walked away. She watched him go and felt the familiar weight of anonymity settle around her like a comfortable cloak. The afternoon session focused on historical battles. Professor Voldrin dimmed the lights and activated the central holographic projector. Today marks a significant moment in your education, he announced. The Coalition Military Command has declassified footage from the contested frontier conflicts, he continued. For 3 years, and humanity fought alongside Coalition forces against the Zarthian swarm in the most brutal campaign of the modern era. Kira's hands tightened on her datapad, but her expression remained unchanged. These recordings have never been shown publicly, Voldrin said, and they contain graphic combat footage and strategic insights that will prove invaluable to your development as future officers. The hologram flickered to life. It showed a star map with sectors highlighted in red, the Epsilon Theater. Voldrin narrated, and where Coalition forces struggled to maintain defensive positions against overwhelming Zarthian numbers. Kira's breathing remained steady, and even but something shifted behind her eyes. over the next several sessions, and we will analyze tactics employed by various coalition units," the professor continued. "We will examine both successes and failures, and learn from those who fought and died in this conflict." He paused, and his tendrils stilling. "I must warn you," he added, "and some of this footage shows the true cost of warfare and the brutality that lies beneath strategic theory." The students shifted in their seats. Several Mindari exchanged concerned glances and their empathic abilities, already sensing the weight of what they were about to witness. "We will begin with standard coalition tactics," Voldrin said, and brought up the first recording. The hologram showed organized battle lines and textbook maneuvers. Coalition forces advanced with proper support and maintained communication protocols and executed flanking movements exactly as taught in academy courses. It was clinical and efficient and ultimately forgettable. "Note the coordination," Voldrin pointed out, "and the adherence to established doctrine." Kira watched without visible reaction. After 3 such recordings, and the professor paused. "Now," he said, and his voice taking on a different tone, "and we examined something unprecedented." He loaded a new file. The designation read, Epsilon Theater, Human Volunteer Corps, Ghost Company. This unit operated under conditions that would break most species, Voldrin explained. Extended combat operations in hostile environments and severed supply lines, he listed. And yet they achieved results that still puzzle military analysts. The recording began. It showed a barren landscape and toxic atmosphere, turning the sky a sickly yellow. 12 human soldiers moved through the terrain, and their movements economical and purposeful. They wore sealed combat suits and carried weapons that looked crude compared to Coalition standard issue. "This is a human unit?" Salaith asked, and her tendrils curling in confusion. "Only 12 soldiers?" "Correct," Voldrin confirmed. The recording showed the unit reaching a rocky choke point between 2 cliff faces. One soldier stepped forward and began issuing orders. The voice came through clear despite the combat suit's filter. "Jenkins and Martinez, and take the high positions." The voice commanded, and calm and precise. "Torres, and set up the heavy gun here and clear that rubble for a stable base." The other soldiers moved without hesitation. They worked with practiced efficiency and transformed the choke point into a defensive position in less than 20 minutes. "They're fortifying," Vexar observed. But for what?" The answer came soon enough. The horizon darkened with approaching Zardian warriors, hundreds of them. The hologram's tactical overlay showed the numbers. 12 humans versus approximately 400 Zardians. "This should have been a massacre," a Vex student stated flatly. The recording continued. The Zardians charged, and their screeching audible even through the recording's audio compression. The human unit opened fire. What followed made the entire classroom fall silent. The humans fought with controlled precision, but also with something else. They adapted in real time and shifted positions and covered each other with movements that seemed almost choreographed. When one soldier's weapon overheated, and another was already moving to provide covering fire, the soldier coordinating the defense never stopped giving orders, and her voice cutting through the chaos. "Conserve ammunition," she commanded, "and aim for the larger ones first and funnel them into the kill zone." The battle lasted 6 hours in the recording. When it ended, and the choke point remained in human hands, Zardian bodies littered the approach. The 12 humans were still standing, and though several showed obvious injuries. Professor Voldrin paused the recording. "This unit held this position for 6 days," he said quietly. "They slept in 20-minute shifts and fashioned new weapons from debris and recycled ammunition from fallen enemies." The classroom was absolutely silent. "The soldier coordinating their defense," Voldrin continued, and rewinding the recording to show her more clearly, "was designated Valkyrie 7, and her real identity remained classified at her own request after the war." He zoomed in on the figure. Even through the combat suit, and her build was clearly smaller than the others. "A human female," Voldrin confirmed. Kira stared at her datapad. Her knuckles had gone white where she gripped it, but no one was looking at her. They were all watching the recording and trying to understand what they had just witnessed. "Tomorrow," Professor Voldrin said, "and we will analyze their tactics in detail, and for now, I want you to consider this question. What makes such endurance possible?" The class filed out in subdued silence. Kira remained seated until the room emptied. Then she carefully placed her datapad in her bag and stood and walked toward the exit. In the empty hallway, and she paused. Her reflection stared back at her from a darkened window. For just a moment, and the mask slipped. The expression that crossed her face was not that of an unremarkable student. It was something harder and older, and marked by memories that weighed like lead. Then it was gone and replaced by practiced neutrality. She continued walking. Behind her and the lecture hall's holographic projector flickered once before powering down completely. The war had followed her here after all. The lecture hall felt different the next morning. Students arrived earlier than usual and clustered in small groups and spoke in hushed tones about yesterday's recording. Kira took her usual seat in the back row and kept her eyes forward. Vexar entered and glanced her way before taking his seat. Something in his gaze had changed, and curiosity perhaps, or reassessment. Professor Voldrin began without preamble. "Today we analyze Ghost Company's defensive tactics," he announced, and brought up the holographic display. "What you witnessed yesterday defies conventional military doctrine, and yet it succeeded," he continued. "We must understand why." The recording played again, and this time with tactical overlays showing positions and sight lines and fields of fire. "Note the initial setup," Voldrin pointed out. "They chose terrain that negated the enemy's numerical advantage and forced engagement on human terms." A Vex student raised a metallic hand. "Professor, and their weapon selection appears suboptimal," the student observed. "Coalition standard plasma rifles would have provided superior stopping power," Voldrin nodded. "An astute observation," he said. "And yet watch what happens at the 4-hour mark." The recording jumped forward. Several human weapons had overheated or run out of ammunition. The soldiers immediately switched to backup weapons, and some cobbled together from Zardian technology and damaged coalition equipment. "They adapted," Voldrin explained. "Human doctrine emphasizes versatility over specialization and improvisation over rigid adherence to standard equipment." The recording showed one soldier taking apart a damaged plasma rifle and combining its power cell with a projectile weapon to create a hybrid that fired superheated rounds. "Impossible," the Vex student muttered. "Those systems are incompatible. And yet," Voldrin said and gestured to the screen, where the makeshift weapon fired successfully. The class watched as Ghost Company continued their defense. The coordination between soldiers seemed almost telepathic, and though humans possessed no such abilities. "Valkyrie 7, Voldrin said, and highlighting her position. "Watch her movement patterns." The soldier in question moved through the defensive position with purpose. She checked ammunition counts and redistributed supplies and adjusted firing positions, and all while maintaining constant communication. "Jenkins and Shift left 3 meters, her voice commanded. "Torres and watch the eastern approach, and I'm seeing movement in the shadows." Before she finished speaking, and Zardians emerged from exactly where she predicted. Torres was already firing. How did she know? Salaith asked, and her tendrils quivering with confusion. Mindari tactical precognition requires telepathic scanning of enemy intentions and humans. Cannot do this. Voldrin paused the recording. "This is one of the great mysteries of human combat effectiveness," he said. "They call it situational awareness and pattern recognition and combat intuition," he explained. "Whatever its source, and certain humans develop an almost supernatural ability to predict enemy movements." Vexar leaned forward in his seat. "This Valkyrie 7, he rumbled. "And what was her rank?" "Initially?" "Corporal," Voldrin answered. "By the time of this recording, and the unit's nominal commander had been killed, and she assumed de facto leadership. "A corporal leading against such odds," Dexar said, and something like respect entering his voice. The recording continued. Day 2 of the 6-day siege began. The humans looked exhausted but maintained their positions. Valkyrie 7 rotated soldiers through rest periods in 20 minutes at a time, and while the others maintained the defense. "Inefficient," a CROD student commented. "Our warriors can fight for days without rest. Can they think clearly while doing so?" Voldrin asked. The student hesitated. "Human physiology requires regular rest cycles," the professor explained, but Valkyrie 7 understood that sharp minds are more valuable than constant presence. "A rested soldier making good decisions is worth 3 exhausted ones making mistakes," he quoted. The recording showed the 3rd day. Zardian tactics changed, and they began probing attacks and testing the defenses for weaknesses. Valkyrie 7 adapted immediately. "They're learning," she told her unit. "Shift to pattern Delta and make them think we're weaker on the north side." The humans deliberately left gaps in their northern defense. When Zardians concentrated their forces there and the trap sprung, concealed explosives and pre-positioned crossfire, and a sudden counterattack drove them back with heavy losses. "Deception," Voldrin noted. "Humans excel at making enemies see what they want to be seen." The 4th day showed increasing desperation. Human ammunition ran critically low. Valkyrie 7 made a decision that shocked the watching students. "Fix bayonets," she ordered. The humans attached bladed weapons to their rifles. "She cannot be serious," a Vex student said. "Melee combat is suicide against Zardian numbers." The recording showed otherwise. When the next wave attacked, and the humans met them with controlled aggression and used the narrow confines of the choke point to prevent being surrounded, they fought with brutal efficiency, and every movement economical and necessary. Valkyrie 7 coordinated even this chaos. "Martinez and on your left," she called out. "Jenkins and fall back 2 steps, and Torres is covering you." It was violence choreographed by someone who understood both terrain and her soldiers' capabilities perfectly. The watching students sat in stunned silence. Kira watched her datapad, but her jaw was clenched tight. The 5th day recording was shorter. Both sides had taken casualties, but the choke point held. Valkyrie 7's voice had grown hoarse but remained steady. "One more day," she told her unit. "Coalition reinforcements are inbound, and we just need to hold one more day. What if they don't come?" Another soldier asked. "Then we hold anyway," she replied, "and because that's the mission." Simple words, but carrying absolute conviction. Professor Voldrin stopped the recording. "This is the essence of human military psychology," he said. "They choose to continue when logic suggests surrender, and they fight not because victory is certain, but because they refuse to accept defeat." He looked around the classroom. "This mindset allowed 12 humans to hold against hundreds," he continued. "Not superior technology, and not genetic advantages, and not telepathic coordination. Just refusal to quit." Dexar spoke up. "Professor, and you said her identity remained classified, and why would a warrior hide such achievements?" Voldrin's tendrils drooped slightly. "Many reasons," he answered. "Some humans who survive such ordeals prefer anonymity, and the weight of being viewed as heroes becomes its own burden. Or perhaps," he added, "and they simply want to be seen as people rather than legends." The words hung in the air. Kira shifted in her seat. The lecture continued with technical analysis of Ghost Company's tactics. But something had changed in the classroom's atmosphere. The casual dismissal of human capabilities had evaporated. During the break, and several students gathered to discuss what they had witnessed. "I heard humans call it the human factor," a Mindari student said. "Some quality that cannot be quantified or replicated. Stubbornness, perhaps," suggested another. "Creativity under pressure," offered a third. Kira walked past them toward the corridor. Dexar intercepted her. "Chun," he said, and blocked her path. She looked up at him and waited. "These humans in the recording," he began, and choosing his words carefully. "They were volunteers and yes? Not conscripts?" "I believe so," Kira answered and kept her voice neutral. "Interesting," Dexar said. "To volunteer for such duty, and one must either be very brave or very foolish." "Maybe both," Kira replied. Something flickered in Dexar's eyes. "You are human," he stated. "And did you know any who fought in that war?" Kira met his gaze steadily. "Many humans fought," she said. "It was our war, too." She stepped around him and continued walking. Dexar watched her go, and his expression thoughtful. The afternoon session showed more recordings. Other human units displayed similar patterns: adaptation and improvisation and psychological resilience that bordered on the incomprehensible. One recording showed humans fighting in toxic environments that would kill most species in hours. They operated in hostile conditions for weeks. Another showed a unit cut off from supplies who hunted local fauna and purified water from industrial runoff and continued their mission without pause. "How?" Salaith asked, and her empathic abilities struggling to comprehend the mental fortitude required. "How do they maintain function under such stress?" "We do not fully understand," Voldrin admitted. "Human psychology remains somewhat mysterious to us, and they possess mental resilience that defies our models." The final recording of the day returned to Ghost Company. It showed Valkyrie 7 during a brief rest period. She sat against a rock wall, and her helmet removed. Her face was streaked with dust and blood. She looked young and impossibly young for someone commanding life and death decisions, but her eyes held something ancient. She was checking ammunition counts and planning the next day's defense and ensuring her soldiers rotated through rest. Even exhausted, and she continued leading. She was 19 during this recording, Voldrin said quietly. Several students gasped. 19 was barely adult by most species standards. 19, Dexar repeated in disbelief clear in his voice. Kira stood abruptly. "Excuse me," she said, and her voice tight. She walked out of the classroom before anyone could respond. The corridor was empty. She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes and took several deep breaths. Behind her, and the lecture continued, Professor Voldrin's voice carried through the doorway. "Tomorrow we examine the Battle of Kepler's Gate," he announced. "The engagement that ended the war and cost Ghost Company everything." Kira's hands clenched into fists. She pushed off the wall and walked away. The past was supposed to stay buried. But apparently, and some truths refused to remain hidden, the academy hallways buzzed with conversation about Ghost Company. Students who had never given humans a second thought now debated their tactics in mess halls and recreation areas. Kira noticed the change in how people looked at her. Not at her specifically, but at humans in general. The casual dismissal had been replaced by curiosity. She kept her head down and maintained her routine. Class began with Professor Voldrin displaying a tactical map. Ghost Company operated primarily in the Epsilon Theater's asteroid fields, he explained. Three-dimensional combat environments where traditional tactics often fail. The hologram showed a dense cluster of asteroids and spinning in chaotic orbits. Most species struggle with spatial reasoning in such terrain, Voldrin continued. Maintaining orientation and tracking enemy positions and coordinating unit movement becomes exponentially more difficult. He brought up a new recording. Ghost Company moved through the asteroid field with practiced ease. They used magnetic grapples to swing between rocks and position themselves in overlapping, triangular formations and created kill zones in 3 dimensions. Valkyrie 7, Voldrin highlighted her position. She hung inverted from an asteroid, in her perspective, completely different from her units, and yet she coordinated their movements flawlessly. Delta formation, her voice commanded. Torres swing high and Jenkins and Martinez hold center, and I'm taking the low approach. The humans moved without hesitation. When Zarthian forces entered the trap, and they found themselves caught in crossfire from above and below and all sides. "Remarkable," a Vex student said. "Human inner ear structures should make such inverted positioning disorienting." "It is," Voldrin confirmed. "Human pilots and soldiers report nausea and vertigo and difficulty maintaining spatial awareness in zero gravity." And yet, he gestured to the screen. Ghost Company operated as if they had been born in space. The recording continued. Valkyrie 7 predicted enemy approach vectors with uncanny accuracy. Incoming from Quadrant 7, she called out 30 seconds before Zardians appeared from exactly that direction. "How?" Salaith demanded. "Is she calculating their trajectories?" "Watch her head movements," Voldrin suggested. The recording zoomed in. Valkyrie 7 constantly scanned her surroundings and absorbed visual information and processed it, and extrapolated enemy positions from the smallest clues. A reflection off a helmet, a shadow crossing an asteroid, debris disturbed by passage. She noticed everything. "Pattern recognition at its finest," Voldrin said. Human brains evolved to detect predators in complex environments, and some humans adapt those instincts to modern combat. Dexar leaned forward. "This is not mere instinct," he objected. "This is trained skill developed over years." "Indeed," Voldrin agreed. Valkyrie 7 did not develop these abilities overnight. The next recording showed Ghost Company in a different scenario. They were outnumbered and outgunned and completely surrounded. Standard tactics suggested immediate surrender. Instead, Valkyrie 7 ordered complete radio silence. "Not a sound," she commanded. "Not a movement," and 18 hours. The humans went absolutely still. They drifted among the asteroids like debris. Zardian forces searched for them and passed within meters and found nothing. The watching students held their breath. 18 hours of absolute stillness. No communication and no movement and barely breathing. "Impossible," a Mindari student whispered. "The psychological stress alone would break most beings." The recording fast-forwarded. When the Zardian forces finally relaxed and assuming Ghost Company had been destroyed or fled, the trap sprung. Humans attacked from 6 directions simultaneously. They had used the 18-hour silence to reposition and memorize enemy patrol patterns and coordinate a strike without any communication. The Zardians routed completely. A force 20 times larger than Ghost Company fled in disarray. Professor Voldrin paused the recording. "Psychological warfare," he stated. "Humans excel at it, and they understand that perception can be as powerful as firepower." Valkyrie 7 turned her unit's apparent weakness into strength, he continued. "The enemy expected humans to behave predictably, and she made them pay for that assumption." The lectures continued over the following days. Each recording revealed new facets of Ghost Company's operations. They ambushed supply convoys with elaborate traps. They broadcasted false radio signals to confuse enemy coordination. They marked safe passages through minefields with symbols only they understood. One recording showed them turning captured enemy weapons against their original owners. Another showed improvised armor welded from salvaged hull plating. Every solution was creative and desperate and effective. And through it all, Valkyrie 7 led. She never asked her soldiers to do anything she would not do herself. She took the most dangerous positions. She went without sleep to plan operations. She shared her rations with wounded soldiers. The class watched her earn loyalty through action rather than rank. Dexar had stopped making dismissive comments about humans. Now he watched the recordings with intense focus and occasionally making notes. During one break, he approached Kira again. "Chun," he said. "I have been reviewing human military history," he continued. "Your species has been fighting wars for thousands of years. Most species have." Kira replied carefully. "Yes, but human wars were fought without advanced technology for most of that history," Dexar observed. You develop tactics and strategy in psychological warfare long before you reach the stars. He paused. Those companies' methods are not new to humans, and are they? Kira met his gaze. Humans have always had to be creative, she said. We were never the strongest or fastest or most numerous, and we learned to win anyway. Nexar nodded slowly. A valuable lesson, he acknowledged. In class, and Professor Voldrin showed a particularly brutal engagement. Ghost Company held a mining station against overwhelming odds. The recording showed close-quarters combat in narrow corridors. Humans fought with rifle butts and knives and bare hands when necessary. Note their formations, Voldrin pointed out. They maintain cohesion even in chaos, and each soldier covering another's blind spots. The fighting was savage. But it was also coordinated. Valkyrie 7's voice cut through the violence. Torres and fall back to Junction 3, she commanded. Jenkins and suppress left corridor and Martinez, and I need cover fire. Each order was precise and timed perfectly. The humans moved like a single organism. This level of coordination typically requires years of training together, Voldrin noted. Ghost Company achieved it in months. How? A student asked. Trust, Voldrin answered. And leadership worth following. The recording showed Valkyrie 7 making a decision. Zardian forces were about to breach their position. She ordered 3 soldiers to hold while the rest retreated. It was a death sentence for the 3. They accepted without hesitation. Hold here, she told them. Buy us 2 minutes. We can give you 3, one replied. Then Valkyrie 7 did something unexpected. She stayed with them. You cannot, one soldier protested. We need you to coordinate the defense. Torres can handle it, she replied. I do not send people to die alone. The 4 of them held the corridor. They gave the rest of Ghost Company time to regroup and fortify. And somehow all 4 survived, wounded but alive. The students sat in stunned silence. She risked everything, Salaith said. For 3 soldiers? For her people, Voldrin corrected. To humans, and loyalty is not abstract, and it is tangible and earned through sacrifice. Kira's hands trembled slightly. She remembered that corridor. She remembered the weight of that decision. She remembered promising herself she would bring them all home. After class, and she found herself surrounded by curious students. Chan, a vexed student said, You are human, and do all humans fight like Ghost Company? No, Kira answered honestly. Most humans never see combat, and those who do vary greatly in skill and temperament. But the potential exists? Dexar asked. Kira considered the question. Humans have potential for many things, she said carefully. Ghost Company represented the best of what we can be under the worst circumstances. Were you too young to serve? Salaith asked. And during the war? Kira felt the weight of that question. The war ended 4 years ago, she said. I would have been eligible for service. Did you serve? Salaith pressed gently. Kira looked at her datapad. Many humans served in various capacities, she replied. Not all service involved combat. It was not quite a lie. Not quite the truth either. Dexar studied her intently. You move like a soldier, he observed. Your posture and your awareness of exits and the way you position yourself to observe the entire room. I notice these things now, he continued. After watching Ghost Company, Kira met his eyes. Maybe I'm just careful, she suggested. Maybe, Dexar agreed. But his tone suggested he did not believe it. The day's final recording showed Ghost Company celebrating a victory. They had captured a strategic position and driven off enemy forces. 12 exhausted humans shared rations and joked and laughed despite their injuries. Valkyrie 7 sat slightly apart, and watching over them, her expression was complex. Pride mixed with sorrow, relief tinged with fear. She looked like someone who knew the cost of victory. Tomorrow, Professor Voldrin announced. We examined the Battle of Kepler's Gate, and the engagement that ended the war and the battle that cost Ghost Company its innocence. His voice was somber. "I warn you now, and what you will see is difficult, and many coalition veterans refuse to watch this footage. But you deserve to understand the true price of peace," he finished. The class filed out quietly. Kira remained seated. Professor Voldrin approached her. "Miss Chun," he said gently, "are you prepared for tomorrow's lecture?" She looked up at him for a moment, and he saw something in her eyes that made him step back. The look of someone who had already seen everything he was about to show. "I'll be here," she said. Voldrin nodded slowly. "If you need to leave at any point, and no one will judge you," he offered. Kira almost smiled. "Thank you, Professor," she said. "But I think I'll stay." She stood and gathered her things and walked toward the exit. Behind her, and Voldrin watched her go. His tendrils quivered with sudden suspicion. The way she moved, the way she held herself, the haunted look in her eyes. He pulled up his datapad and began searching through student records. Kira Chun, age 23, enrolled 8 months ago. No prior military service listed, but service records could be sealed, could be classified, could be hidden. He looked at the classroom's holographic projector. Tomorrow's lecture would reveal the truth. One way or another, the lecture hall felt heavier than usual. Students entered in near silence and took their seats with unusual solemnity. Word had spread about today's topic, the Battle of Kepler's Gate. Even those unfamiliar with the contested frontier war knew that name. It was the engagement that had turned the tide, the battle that had cost thousands of lives, the moment when humanity proved it would not surrender. Kira arrived early and sat in her usual spot. Her expression was carefully neutral, but her hands gripped the edge of her desk. Dexar entered and nodded to her. He had taken to acknowledging her presence now. Professor Voldrin stood at the front, and his usual calm demeanor replaced by something grimmer. "Today, we examine the most significant engagement of the contested frontier war," he began. "What I am about to show you is difficult to watch," he continued. "Coalition medical staff report that veterans of this battle experience lasting psychological effects." He paused. "If anyone wishes to leave and do so now, and there is no shame in it." No one moved. Voldrin activated the holographic display. A star map appeared showing a critical junction point between Coalition territory and the inner systems. "Kepler's Gate," Voldrin explained. "A natural choke point, created by gravitational eddies and asteroid clusters, and the only viable passage to 3 populated systems, containing over 2 billion beings." The map shifted to show military positions. Coalition forces in full retreat, Zardian swarm advancing in overwhelming numbers. Coalition Command estimated they needed 96 hours to regroup and fortify inner defenses, Voldrin stated. Without those 96 hours, and the Zardians would have reached population centers. He brought up casualty projections. The numbers were staggering. A delaying action was required, Voldrin continued. Someone had to hold Kepler's Gate for 4 days against an enemy force that outnumbered them hundreds to 1. He paused. Ghost Company volunteered. The classroom went silent. 37 soldiers remained in Ghost Company at this point, Voldrin said. They had been fighting continuously for 11 months and were due for rotation to rear areas for rest and resupply. Instead, they volunteered for what everyone understood was a suicide mission. The recording began. Ghost Company moved into position at Kepler's Gate. The location was barely defensible. A series of connected asteroids and rocky outcroppings and narrow passages that could be fortified but never truly secured. Valkyrie 7 directed the fortification efforts. Her voice came through clearly. "We are not trying to win," she told her soldiers. "We are trying to buy time, and every hour we hold is another 1,000 lives saved." The soldiers worked without complaint. They set up defensive positions and laid traps and stockpiled ammunition. They knew what was coming. "Lieutenant Chun," a voice called from the recording. Kira's entire body went rigid. Several students glanced her way. Dexter's eyes widened. On the recording, and a medic approached Valkyrie 7, Lieutenant Chen. The medic repeated, "You need to let me treat that wound." The camera angle shifted. Valkyrie 7's helmet was off. The face beneath was young and female, and streaked with dust and blood. But the eyes, those eyes were old beyond their years. Every student in the classroom turned to stare at Kira. She sat perfectly still and watched the recording. Professor Voldrin stopped the playback. "Lieutenant Kira Chen," he said quietly. "Designated Valkyrie 7 and commanding officer of Ghost Company during the Battle of Kepler's Gate." The silence was absolute. 19 years old at the time of this engagement, Voldrin continued. Recipient of the Coalition's highest honors, and all of which she refused to accept publicly, Kira finally looked up, met the eyes of everyone watching her. "May I continue?" Voldrin asked gently. Kira nodded once. The recording resumed. The Battle of Kepler's Gate unfolded in brutal detail. Owl 1 showed the first Zardian assault. Ghost Company met them with concentrated fire and used every advantage of terrain and positioning. They held. Hour 12 showed ammunition running low. Kira's voice coordinated supply redistribution. "Priority to heavy guns," she commanded. "Rifles switched to semi-automatic and conserve every shot." Hour 24 showed the first human casualties. 2 soldiers killed and 5 wounded. Kira refused to evacuate the wounded. "We need every gun," she told the medic. "Patch them up and get them back in position." Hour 36 showed hand-to-hand fighting. Zardians breached the outer defenses. Humans fought with knives and rifle butts and desperate fury. Kira was everywhere, rallying positions and directing fire and fighting alongside her soldiers. Hour 48 showed Ghost Company reduced to 29 operational soldiers. Kira's voice had gone hoarse but remained steady. "We are halfway there," she told them. 48 more hours and the fleet regroups. "We can do this." The students watched in horrified fascination. This was not the clean theoretical warfare they studied. This was brutal and visceral and real. Hour 60 showed Kira making impossible decisions. Which positions to abandon? Which soldiers to pull back? Which defenses to sacrifice? Each choice meant lives. She made them without hesitation. Hour 71 showed her coordinating artillery strikes while bleeding from a shrapnel wound. A medic tried to pull her back. "After," she said. "I'll rest after." The recording showed her face. Blood-streaked and exhausted, but absolutely focused. "Torres, and pull back to secondary position," she commanded. "Jenkins and I need suppressing fire on approach vector 3. Every order was precise. Every decision calculated. She held the line through sheer force of will. Hour 84 showed Ghost Company reduced to 15 operational soldiers, many wounded and all exhausted. Ammunition nearly depleted. Kira gathered them. 12 more hours, she said. "That is all we need in 12 hours. Can we do it?" "Yes, ma'am," they replied in unison. No hesitation, complete trust. Hour 90 showed the final Zardian assault. They threw everything at Ghost Company, wave after wave. The humans held through sheer desperation. When ammunition ran out and they fought with whatever they could find, the recording showed Kira with a damaged rifle and firing until it broke and then using it as a club. She was wounded in multiple places. She should have been incapacitated. She kept fighting. Hour 94 showed Coalition fleet elements beginning to arrive. "Hold," Kira commanded. "Just hold 2 more hours, down to 11 operational soldiers." Every one of them injured, but they held. The recording showed the moment the Coalition fleet secured the area. Ghost Company had done it in 96 hours. They had held for 96 hours. The cost was evident. Of 37 soldiers who started the battle and 11 remained standing. 26 casualties, 17 killed in action. The recording showed Coalition medics rushing in. They tried to evacuate Kira first. She refused. "My soldiers first," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Every one of them before me," the medics argued. She was the most critically wounded. "That is an order," she said. They evacuated her soldiers. Finally, and when only she remained, and she allowed herself to be loaded onto a transport. The recording showed her losing consciousness. The last words audible were from a medic. "Lieutenant Chen, and you need to stay awake." The recording ended. The lecture hall was silent. Professor Voldrin turned to face the class. "Lieutenant Chen was awarded the Coalition Star of Valor," he said. "The Terran Congressional Medal of Honor and the Mindari Crystal of Ultimate Sacrifice, and an honors from 17 other Coalition species. She refused them all," he continued. "She requested medical retirement and anonymity, and the right to continue her life without being defined by 96 hours of horror." Every eye in the room was on Kira. She sat quietly, and her expression unreadable. Vexar stood. The massive Krod warrior moved to stand before her desk. He executed a deep formal bow. "I've been blind and foolish and insulting," he said. "I judged without understanding, and I dishonored a warrior whose achievements dwarf my own. Forgive me." Kira looked up at him. "You did not know," she said quietly. "That is not an excuse," Vexar replied. "I dismissed you because you are human and because I assumed weakness where there was only restraint." Other students were standing now. Salaith approached, and her tendrils quivering with emotion. "The pain you carry," the Mindari said softly. "I can feel it, and even without direct contact, and how do you bear it?" Kira's carefully maintained mask finally cracked. "I do not bear it well," she admitted. "I came here hoping to learn how to prevent wars like that, and I hoped that understanding former enemies might lead to peace." She paused. "And I hoped that hiding who I was would let me be just a student, and not a symbol, or a hero, or a reminder of how many did not come home." Tears threatened, but she held them back. 17 members of Ghost Company died at Kepler's Gate," she said. "They died following my orders, and trusting my decisions, and believing I would get them through. I did not." "You saved billions," Voldrin said gently. "Yes," Kira replied, "but I could not save them." The weight of that statement filled the room. This was the cost of leadership, the burden of survival, the price of being the one who makes impossible choices. A Vex student spoke up. "You requested anonymity, and yet you enrolled in the military academy under your real name, and surely you knew these recordings would eventually be studied." Kira managed a small, bitter smile. "I thought they would remain classified longer," she admitted. "And perhaps part of me wanted to be found and wanted someone to see past the mask and wanted to stop hiding." She stood. "I am sorry I deceived you," she said to the class. "I am sorry I let you think I was mediocre when I was simply trying not to stand out. But I am not sorry for what Ghost Company did, and we bought time, and we saved lives, and we did our duty." "That is enough." Vexar spoke again. "It is more than enough," he said. "You have taught us humility and respect and the true meaning of sacrifice. We are honored to study beside you." The entire class stood, each offering their species' gesture of respect. Krod bows, Mindari tendril touches, Vex synchronized nods, all directed at the small human woman who had hidden her legend behind carefully maintained anonymity. Professor Voldrin let the moment settle. "Class dismissed," he finally said. Students filed out slowly, and many approaching Kira to offer personal words of respect. She accepted them with quiet dignity. When the room finally emptied, and only Voldrin remained, "What now?" he asked. Kira gathered her things. "Now I stop hiding," she said. "Now I try to become the officer Ghost Company would have wanted me to be." She walked toward the exit, and then paused. "Professor, and thank you for telling their story, and they deserve to be remembered." Voldrin nodded. "They will be," he promised. Kira left. Behind her, the holographic display flickered once before shutting down. The war was over. but for those who fought it and the battle never truly ends. All they could do was make the sacrifice mean something. The following morning brought change. Students who had previously ignored Kira now made room for her in the corridors. Those who had dismissed humans now watched her with open curiosity and respect. The casual hierarchy of the academy had shifted overnight. Kira arrived at Advanced Tactical Theory to find students already present. They stopped talking when she entered. She walked to her usual seat in the back row. "Chun," Dexar called from the front. "There is a seat here." He gestured to an empty chair beside him. An honor by Crod standards, Kira hesitated and then nodded. She moved forward and took the offered seat. Professor Voldrin entered and surveyed the classroom. His expression was unreadable. "Today we analyze tactical decision-making under extreme pressure," he announced. "And we have someone uniquely qualified to provide insight." He looked at Kira. "Lieutenant Chen, and would you be willing to discuss your command decisions at Kepler's Gate?" Every eye turned to her. Kira took a breath. "What would you like to know?" she asked. A Vex student raised a metallic hand. "Hour 48 of the battle, and you chose to abandon the eastern defensive position, despite having soldiers there, and how did you make that decision?" Kira's eyes focused on something distant. "The eastern position was overrun," she said. "I had 3 soldiers there and wounded and low on ammunition. Keeping them there meant they would die and the position would fall anyway. Pulling them back cost us territory, but saved 3 lives and allowed us to reinforce the central position where they could still contribute." She paused. "I chose people over ground, and if that decision had cost you the entire battle?" The Vex student pressed. "Then I would have failed." Kira replied simply. "But I would have failed having done everything I could to bring my people home. Some things matter more than victory." Salaith spoke up and her voice gentle. "You said you could not save them and the 17 who died, but you saved 11 and against. Impossible odds, and how do you reconcile that?" Kira was quiet for a moment. "I do not," she finally said. 17 people trusted me and died, and no amount of logic or justification changes that. I carry them with me and I honor them by trying to be worthy of their sacrifice. That is all I can do." The honesty in her words struck deep. Professor Voldrin nodded slowly. "This is the burden of command," he said. "The weight that leaders must carry, and the cost of making life and death decisions." He brought up a tactical simulation. "Let us apply these lessons," he suggested. The holographic display showed a defensive scenario. Overwhelming enemy forces and limited resources and impossible odds. Standard Academy problem. Chun, and how would Ghost Company approach this? Voldrin asked. Kira stood and studied the display. Her demeanor shifted. The uncertain student vanished. In her place stood the officer who had held Kepler's Gate. "First, and we identify what we are actually defending," she said. "Not the position, but the time needed for evacuation or reinforcement." She manipulated the hologram. "We set up here and here and in here, and not because these are good defensive positions, but because they force the enemy to approach predictably." Her fingers moved quickly and adjusting unit placements. "We prepare fallback positions in advance, and we do not commit to holding any single location. We trade space for time, and we make them pay for every meter." Students leaned forward. This was not textbook doctrine. "We identify their command elements," she continued. "We target leaders and communication nodes and create chaos in their ranks. Confusion is force multiplier when you are outnumbered." She added irregular tactical elements. "We use psychological warfare and make them think we are stronger than we are, and make them hesitate and make them question their intelligence. Fear is a weapon." Dexar rumbled his approval. "You fight not to win, but to survive long enough for circumstances to change," he observed. "Exactly," Kira confirmed. Ghost Company was never going to defeat the Zardian swarm, and we just needed to hold until the coalition fleet arrived. Every tactic, and every sacrifice and every decision served that single goal. She ran the simulation. Her tactics were unorthodox but effective. The defending force held far longer than traditional doctrine suggested possible. Remarkable, Professor Voldrin said. You accept losses that most commanders would consider unacceptable. I accept necessary losses, Kira corrected. There is a difference between spending lives and wasting them. She sat back down. The weight of command settled over her shoulders again. Class continued with students asking questions. Kira answered them with patience and honesty. She did not glorify war. She did not present herself as invincible. She showed them the reality of combat leadership, the impossible choices and the heavy costs and the responsibility that never ends. During the break, a group of students approached her. Chun, a Mindari student, began hesitantly. Would you and could you teach us more about human tactical thinking? Our standard doctrine emphasizes overwhelming force and technological superiority, a Vex student added. We are unprepared for situations where we lack those advantages. Kira considered the request. I can share what I learned, she said. But understand that Ghost Company's methods came from desperation, and not all of our tactics were successful. We made mistakes, and people died because of those mistakes. I do not want you to romanticize what we did. We understand. Dexar said, We seek knowledge and not glory stories. Kira nodded. Then I will help however I can. Over the following weeks, and something shifted in the academy. Kira began leading informal tactical discussions. She taught students to think beyond doctrine, to adapt and to improvise, and to value creativity over rigid adherence to established methods. She shared lessons learned in blood. Never assume the enemy will behave logically, she told them. Never commit your reserves too early. Never stop looking for alternative solutions. And never and ever give up on your people. Her teaching style was direct and practical and occasionally brutal in its honesty. When a student proposed a tactic that would sacrifice soldiers unnecessarily, and Kira shut it down immediately, "Those are not chess pieces," she said sharply. "Those are thinking and feeling beings who trust you to value their lives. If you spend them carelessly, and you do not deserve to lead them." The rebuke stung, but the lesson stuck. Dexar became her closest colleague. The Krod warrior appreciated her directness and her refusal to sugarcoat difficult truths. "You are unlike any human I expected to meet," he told her one day. "What did you expect?" Kira asked. "Weakness and perhaps or arrogance to compensate for perceived weakness," Dexar admitted. "Instead, I find strength tempered by wisdom and confidence balanced by humility." He paused. "You are a warrior in the truest sense." Kira smiled slightly. "I am a survivor who learned how to lead," she corrected. "Sometimes that is all being a warrior means." Professor Voldrin observed these changes with satisfaction. His star student had been hiding in plain sight. Now she was helping forge the next generation of coalition officers. Officers who understood that species differences could be strengths rather than weaknesses. One day he called Kira to his office. "Lieutenant Chun," he began. "I have been contacted by Coalition Command." Kira tensed slightly. "They are pleased with the tactical discussions you have been leading," Voldrin continued. "They want to know if you would consider an instructor position after graduation." Kira was quiet. "I came here to be a student," she finally said. "To learn and not to teach." "And you have learned," Voldrin replied. "You have learned that your experiences have value and that sharing them can prevent others from making the same mistakes. Is that not worth pursuing?" Kira thought about Ghost Company, about the 17 who did not come home, about the lessons purchased with their lives. "Yes," she said quietly. "I suppose it is." The semester progressed toward final examinations. The culminating exercise was a complex multi-day simulation. Students were divided into mixed species teams. Kira's team included Dexar and Salaith, and 3 Vex students and 2 other humans. the scenario was deliberately impossible. Defend the civilian population center against overwhelming enemy forces with limited resources and no hope of reinforcement. Most teams accepted defeat within the first 12 hours. Kira's team held for 3 days. She applied everything she had learned at Kepler's Gate. Psychological warfare to create enemy confusion. Flexible defense that traded space for time. Creative use of limited resources. Emphasis on protecting her team rather than holding positions. They did not win, but they held longer than anyone thought possible. The simulation ended with enemy forces finally overrunning their position. But the civilian evacuation had completed. Mission accomplished. The evaluation board was impressed. Lieutenant Chen, the senior evaluator, said, "Your team lost every major engagement, yet accomplished the mission objective and explained this apparent contradiction." Kira smiled. "We define victory differently," she replied. "We were not trying to destroy the enemy, and we were trying to save the civilians. Every hour we held was another 1,000 lives evacuated. Winning battles is less important than achieving the mission." The evaluator nodded slowly. "Ghost Company's philosophy," he observed. "Yes, sir," Kira confirmed. "It kept us alive, and it saved billions, and it seems worth applying." Graduation approached. The academy prepared for the traditional ceremony. Kira stood among her classmates in formal uniform. Human dress uniform and decorated only with academy honors, and no mention of her war service. That was how she wanted it. Dexar stood beside her. "We will serve together one day," he said. "I am certain of it." "Perhaps," Kira replied. "The galaxy is smaller than we think." The ceremony proceeded. When Kira's name was called and the response was different than for other graduates, the entire auditorium stood. Species from across the coalition offered their gestures of respect. It was not celebration of her as a hero. It was acknowledgement of her as a teacher, as someone who had bridged the gap between species through honesty and shared experience. She accepted her diploma from Professor Voldrin. "You have honored Ghost Company," he said quietly. "You have made their sacrifice meaningful." Kira's eyes glistened slightly, but she held her composure. "Thank you, Professor," she said, "for everything." After the ceremony and students gathered for final farewells, Kira found herself surrounded by classmates who had become friends. They shared promises to stay in contact and to serve the coalition with honor. "You taught us to see beyond species," Saleth said, "to value adaptability over pure strength. You showed us that humans are not weak," a Vex student added. "You are differently strong." Kira smiled at that. "We are all differently strong," she said. "That is the point of the coalition and combining our strengths to become something greater than any single species." As the sun set over the academy and Kira stood looking out at the campus. 4 years since Kepler's Gate. 4 years of hiding and healing and finally teaching. She had come here broken and hoping to disappear. Instead, she had found purpose. Dexar approached and stood beside her. "What now?" he asked. "Now I teach." Kira replied, "I help forge officers who understand what Ghost Company learned. That species differences are assets, not liabilities. That creativity and adaptability matter more than pure strength. And that the mission is always about protecting people and not just winning battles." She paused. "And maybe, and just maybe, and I help prevent another Kepler's Gate." Dexar nodded. A worthy goal. They stood in comfortable silence, 2 warriors from different worlds, united by respect earned through honesty and shared purpose. The galaxy beyond needed what they had learned here. It needed officers who understood that strength came in many forms, that humanity's refusal to surrender was not stubbornness but strength, that the quiet student in the back row might carry more wisdom than the loudest voice. Kira Chun had hidden her power, but the war recording had revealed everything. And in that revelation, and she had found not fame but purpose, not glory but meaning, Ghost Company's legacy would live on. Not in medals or monuments, but in the officers she would train, in the lives they would save, in the wars they might prevent. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.